Good afternoon. I'm Medha Basu, GovInsider's Deputy Editor. Thank you for joining us for day 3 of the Festival of Innovation. Over the next hour, we're going to discuss digital identity and the trust and services they enable. Our first speaker is from Japan. Digital identity is a key pillar of the country's 2030 digital vision. And joining us from Japan is Toshiyuki Zamma-san, Executive Advisor to the Government Chief Information Officer. Welcome, Zamma-san.
Hi, hello.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation, and happy to share my experience in Japan. So okay, I will show the slide quickly. And okay, so my presentation has started. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, and somewhere good morning from Japan. My name is Toshi Zamma. Is executive advisor to the government CIO and also the chairman digital government technology committee. Today I'd like to introduce our progress about the digital identity, especially under the COVID-19 situations. First of all, I'd like to introduce our official digital identity, which we call My Number. Japanese government started My Number, the policy, in 2016 in January. And they also, at the same time, we started to provide ID card, which we call My Number card. And the portal site, which we call Minor Portal, launched in November 2017. And the My Number card works for some purposes, many purposes. I think it's same to the other country. We can use the other official identity card, and also we can use that for the online services. Especially identity verification is very important, of course, for the official. And also we are thinking to wide range use case to provide the services in the private sector. Now we are on the journey, and still we are working. And this is the image of the My Number card. We put the name, address, date of the birth, and the interesting is the, I think, backside. We wrote the My Number not on the front side, in the backside. We think this is very critical, and we don't want to share to the public. So that is why. So we write the My Number at the backside. That is I think that is the reason that why the My Number's purpose and the use case is very limited. So it's a little bit too much sensitive about this point. And also we have the IC chip, and this one is type B. Type B is a little bit unique and very strong to tampers. And we just put the very minimal necessary information in the IC chip. There is no personal information. And the very common use case of My Number card is here. One is the smartphone apps. And for example, I'm also the executive advisor to the Ministry of Finance and in charge of the tax agency. And the tax agency is providing the e-tax. And the e-tax is from this year, we started to provide the application for the smartphone. And also there is a kiosk machine at the convenience store, and you can take the certification, for example, residential record or something. I think we are thinking to go 100% digital, and this is not so perfectly digital solution, I think. And in my opinion, so we should remove such kind of certification paper. However, in the middle, so this is really highly evaluated from the citizens. So this is very convenient. We can take it anytime, anywhere. So that is the very interesting. The evaluation from the specialist expert is different from the citizens. And the also the coverage of the My Number card is more important things. You can see this at the end of the August. We have the around 23 million cards has provided. But in Japan, this is just 18% for the population. But as you can see, under the COVID situation, there are so many demands to use the online services. That is why the number of the card is rapidly increasing. And there is a case in Japan to support the cash handout to respond to COVID-19. Japanese government decided to provide the 100,000 yen. That means the around 1,300 Singapore dollars, and it already almost finished. 99% has finished. At that time, so we also decided to use the online services. At the first time, we recommend to do that. The result is here. Japan has around 1,700 local government and launched online applications through central government portal site. However, around 100 local government suspended online services because the one thing is the quality of the application was not perfect for the first time. But the main issue is a business process, I think. The local government, inside the local government, still they are working on the paper, and it's difficult to connect to the information to their residential record, and that is why government officer should check by the paper by hand. That is why it was not efficient. And we have to think about some kind of the traditional way of the thinking. So that is really related to today's discussion. Digital identity is for one person, individual, of course. But traditionally, we recognize that the smallest unit in the society is a family. So the local government also considers that the smallest unit is a family. And if we use the paper, we send the paper application to the address. On the paper, every family name was written, and you should just write the bank account information and send it. Very, very easy. However, online, every family member should do the same things. And also the government officer should check at the same time. That was not useful in this case. So we should think about what is the identity. In the real world, as I told you, we have several identities in the local government, central government, and maybe office, and the driver's license, mileage, or something. And in the virtual, in the digital, we have more. So my recommendation is we should think about not only about the digital identity by official, but also the private digital identity. So here is a case of to use the private digital ID. The left side is this online survey about COVID-19. We did 5 times because there is why. So we use this social media service because the user is 84 millions. So tons of the users they have. So it's very easy to access, easy to reach to every citizens. On the right side, we use the anonymous data, real-time crowded situation. You can see the situation and you can decide which road we should take, which train we should take, how do we commute safely. So that is the purpose of to use the digital information. So that is why I recommend to mix the both style. This is just a reference. and for the next digital government toward 2013. So this is the grand design for the digital government authority. So it's just reference. And the conclusion. So I have 5 pointed. First of all, think and design carefully before you start. So after we started, we found that the family is the smallest unit. Of course, we knew that, but we didn't think that the impact of that. And also, we need to involve every stakeholders. So that means the top-down and the bottom-up approach mixed is the best. So we should think about the top priority from the prime minister order, and also we should ask to the local government officers what is the best way. And also don't take unusual way for the crisis situation. Every time we should prepare for that, we can use that. Not if you don't use that way. And the digital transformation is only talking about the government, but whole of the society is very, very important for inclusiveness. Finally, that is why I'm here. Don't challenge alone. So this pandemic is the problem, issues for every country, and the response should be international one. So that is why I'm here, and I'm talking about our success case and failure cases, because the collaboration is a key for the success. This is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Zamma-san, for sharing that incredible message and for sharing Japan's vision for digital identity. Our next speaker is from India, which of course has the world's largest biometric identity system. Please welcome Abhishek Singh. He is CEO of MyGov, which is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's flagship program, and also CEO of the National E-Governance Division.
Yeah.
Welcome,
Thank
Abhishek.
You, and let me just share my slides. Yeah, I hope it's visible and I'm audible.
We can hear you well. We can't yet see your slides.
Can't see my slides.
I think they're coming up now.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. Are they good? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you, and thank you. And the presentation just before me from Japan was very insightful and kind of highlights the key issues that we face when dealing with digital identities. And it's indeed an honor and privilege for me to be on this platform and learning from my fellow panelists. And I'm sure the discussions, the questions that will be following will be very useful for all of us. So when we talk of digital identity...
Sorry to interrupt, Abhishek. Your slides have just gone blank. If you could just reshare your screen with us.
Is it visible?
Yes. We can see it now. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we talk of digital identity, the issues and challenges, even though we have the biometric identity, which covers more than almost 1.2 billion people in our country, but still what we find is that in today's age, when people use various kind of platforms and various kind of services, various kinds of apps, and they register on various e-services, every citizen ends up getting multiple digital IDs. And the challenge becomes like every government department or every private, every service provider offering any service, whether we take a telecom phone connection or a broadband connection or we subscribe to a OTT platform or something, everywhere we get an ID. And we were just doing a check, and I found that for myself, I did the check, and I found I have more than almost 100 digital IDs, which become very difficult to manage. The various IDs with the bank services, everywhere you have a different ID. And when we deal with services, we also find that there are several cloud environments. When I go to Google, I have a different kind of environment. I deal with social media platforms, different kind of environments. And there are a multiplicity of stacks and platforms. And though the citizen looks at government or the services as he would rather like to have one common uniform service provider, one has to deal with multiple service providers, multiple IDs, multiple stacks, multiple platforms, And each one of these service providers has a different data policy, or there are sandboxes with which you need to integrate any service that you are trying to build up. So this causes a lot of confusion among citizens, and also leads to other challenges, like very often people forget their IDs, people don't know how to handle it, and it leads to cybercrime and it leads to financial frauds. So that has also been seen in the present day scenario as we work in. So the question that remains is that how do we resolve this problem? How do we architecturally solve it? How do we interlink databases so that a citizen is able to access public services in an integrated manner and in a simple, easy to navigate manner? So when we do that, what we find is that most of the models that they are there, they're too generic. They talk of like maybe in India, like we have the common ID called the UID, the Aadhaar ID, which covers 1.2 billion. So every ID should link to that. Then it becomes too government centric, and then the issues of data privacy and data security come in. Okay, like how do we ensure that the citizen retains control over his ID, over his data, and the privacy issues are not violated? And very often, the more the existing reference models of building up a service delivery platform on an digital ID architecture, they become like too complicated, and they are not innovation friendly. It becomes very difficult for anybody to build up a solution on top of that. So for that, and this results in like the dream of one government becomes distant, because we always want to offer services across multiple departments, whether you are a farmer or whether you are also a beneficiary under some welfare scheme. You should be able to access services without knowing which app you have to use or which portal you have to use. So what we find is that when we go digital in delivering public services, the complexity from the point of view of a citizen increases. Earlier, the citizen was required to go from one public office to another in a physical world, but in a digital world, it becomes one portal to another, or the one app to another. So how do we interlink these services? And what this requires is thinking of an architecture where there will be common building blocks over which all services can be built up. So this is the architecture that we're trying to build up, and what we call this is a digital public platform. Like, can we ensure that the identity solution or the payment solution or the vault or a document repository, can it be integrated in such a manner that all other services are offered on top of it? And this is what we call as a digital public platform. The public platforms will offer certain core services, and they will be integrated. Various databases will be integrated, and services will be built up through an open API and an open standards architecture, which will enable multiple services to be offered through these public platforms. And this requires not an enterprise architecture. We are moving away from enterprise architecture, and we are calling something which we call as ecosystem architecture, which enables different stakeholders, which might be different enterprises, to join hands with open APIs riding on the common building blocks to offer services in integrated manner. And with this, the digital platforms become the societal platforms, when we put the citizen at the center of the service delivery paradigm and ensure that the requirements are met from what a citizen or what a user wants in a corporate setup, and the public platform, the service provider, offers services from the perspective of the citizen. So this is what we are trying to change the entire service platform from the government-centric beings to the citizen-centric scenario. And of course, while doing so, we are studying what is happening worldwide and what is other countries which are doing in this regard. And this, what we are finding in India is that currently, when we worked on this enterprise architecture framework, which we called as India Enterprise Architecture, which is now being renamed as Ecosystem Architecture, we found there is a lot of demand from various government departments for offering the services on this kind of architecture system. We are already setting up a national digital health platform, which is riding on this, which will enable public services across the length and breadth of the country, from at any level and across public and private hospitals, to be integrated into a digital health platform. Similarly, agriculture, we are trying to link up databases, whether it's the soil health data or the land records data or the irrigation data, with the weather data and the rainfall data and the crop history data, to ensure that that based on all these databases that exist, they're interlinked, and a farmer is able to get agree advisories on his phone which are customized based on the data that exists. And there's a lot of data analytics and AI related software which goes in to predict what crop a farmer should sow at what time and what inputs he should use, what kind of seeds, what kind of fertilizers, what kind of irrigation, what kind of high yielding variety seeds he should be using. So customized advisories are given, because actually sowing time will also depend on weather data and all. So based on that, these are the inputs that are being provided. Similar things have been done for nutrition, for education, for rural housing, for logistics, and for designing smart cities. Based on the mobility data, the smart cities get like which are the routes on which based on the mobility data which we get from telecom operators and platforms like Google, is that wherein we may require a new metro line or a new monorail or a new flyover. So this kind of integrated data from different sets are pooled in together for policy planning and ensuring that we are able to take those policy calls based on real-time data and analysis. And when we leverage all this data with regard to which come from disparate databases but interlinked on this the new architectural framework that we are talking of, it helps in more informed data-based decision support system. But what it requires is that, of course, this is the most critical part of it. Like, in order to realize this, in order to ensure that we are able to do this, it requires leadership at several levels. It requires technology leadership. It requires people who are trained in the new technologies that are coming up. It requires governance leadership. It requires like people who can think of designing, using technology for social empowerment, using technology for solving public policy problems. So that is what is very critical. And of course, when we design solutions, when we use technology for designing solutions, whether it's identity related or any public service delivery related, it has to be values based and human values based. Like, how do we keep the citizen at the focus of it? So this becomes the critical part of it, and we call this integrated leadership model, which includes governance, values, and technology as systems leadership. So this was what I wanted to speak about what leadership, what public service delivery and digital identities can do. And I will just, in a couple of slides, mention something about how this entire system is also being supported through innovations which we have seen happening in MyGov, especially during this pandemic. What we found was that when the pandemic started, like COVID-19, and India is like in the center of it right now. We are the second largest country in terms of the cases detected. But we have always felt the data that has come from the pandemic that the infection rates in any country would be like almost 25%, 25-30% of the population. And with the lockdown restrictions going up, the cases go up. But what helps in this manner? So what we did for handling with the pandemic, which has ensured that our fatality rates have remained low, is a very strong behavioral change communications plan, which involved all stakeholders to be able to join hands together to communicate that till we get a vaccine, social distancing and use of masks are the only ways in which we can prevent this pandemic to affect more people and to ensure that lives are not lost. So a lot of technology and a lot of innovations were used. We use Google Maps to provide access to people for shelter homes, feeding centers for the poor people, testing labs in order to ensure that people do not have to travel far for getting themselves tested. So those partnerships and those innovations really helped us in pushing forward the COVID-19 management agenda. Then the change management becomes very critical part of it with regard to any public service delivery platform, and especially the work from home culture. That how do we ensure that the work output in the public sector and the private sector doesn't get impacted due to this pandemic. And then promoting out-of-box thinkers, taking risks, innovating, experimenting has helped in pushing forward the innovation agenda in the government. And we also tried certain, when the communications were becoming a bit stale with regard to the do's and don'ts for the pandemic, we used music in order to communicate the messages better. We got renowned musicians who compose special numbers just to communicate the same messages of use of masks or social distancing for COVID-19. So based on that, and the last slide is that, like, in order to ensure that public service deliveries and the innovations that are done are sustained and nurtured, what we need to do, of course, is how do we document best practices? How do we share it across? Then how do we promote people, especially when we are not meeting physically? How do we promote the teams which are working remotely to join in and to take credit for whatever work is being done, build up partnerships with civil servants, with civil society, alum groups, and innovation circles around the world. And in fact, such forums like the one that you guys have convened as GovInsiders also gives us learn about how different countries are dealing with the same challenges and how do we adopt it in our practices and make it work. And I always feel that we all, whether we are here or whether in any other country, we are facing today similar problems, and just Control C, Control V works in a great manner. And the mantra has been that learn, practice, implement, document whatever you are doing, share it with the larger audiences, and ensure that there is a multiplier effect and we are able to make it better. Yeah, that's it that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for sharing those excellent insights on India's innovations. And now we turn to Singapore's Lee Wei Lo on how identity and data can be better protected. Lee Wei is product manager of SGID at the Open Government Products Unit of the Govtech agency. Welcome, Lee Wei.
Hi, thanks, Medha. Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Yep, my name is Lee Wei, and I'm a product manager from the Open Government Products team here at the Government Technology Agency of Singapore. So I'm currently working on SGID, which is an extension to the existing Singapore government's National Digital Identity Program. But in the previous role I was working on, I was also working on data.gov.sg, which is the Singapore government's open data platform, and also advocating for open data generally within the public sector. So before I move into the product specific regarding SGID, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce our team, the Open Government Products team, or OGP for short, and also like the kind of work that we do and who we are. So OGP is an experimental team within Govtech Singapore, and we comprise of engineers, designers, and product managers. But the key goal of OGP is to build technology for the public good. When I say public good, how this manifests itself is in some of the applications and digital services that we build. So some examples of products that Singapore citizens might be familiar with are like parking.sg, form.gov.sg, go.gov.sg, and a couple of others. And some of these might be even transparent to the citizens. And how did OGP come about? And it's mostly because of a reflection, as in we took some time to reflect on the world and how things were evolving around us. And what we noticed is that in many industries, in the past couple of years, there were a lot of like new modern tech companies that were disrupting the way some of these industries were building. And what we were wondering is, how could we leverage on this and build an organization that operated very much like how a tech company operates, but work specifically on public sector problems. And SGID is one such problem that we're trying to solve. So a brief introduction into SGID. So SGID is an experimental extension that we are doing with the National Digital Identity Program, and it's trying to solve this problem, which is in the past couple of years, and this probably has been accelerated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been a large number of companies that have been going digital, and you would expect with the same increase in the number of transactions, there has also been a corresponding increase in the number of scams or fraud cases or digital identity fraud cases that have been happening all over the world. And given this problem, how can we design some of our authentication services, identity services, to make online transactions safer? And we've tried to tackle this in three main ways, or three problems that we're trying to solve. The first problem that we're trying to solve is fake accounts, and how positive verification can help to prevent such online fraudulent activity. So without SGID or any identity system, what would happen is that if you are a malicious actor, you could very easily create multiple accounts on a business. And if, let's say, any specific account were to be reflected or pointed out to be a fake account, it's actually very trivial for a malicious actor to just delete that account, create a new account, and just go about their own ways. And as a business, you will have very little recourse to take, or very little tools on your hands to prevent such activity from happening. But with online identity verification like SGID, what you could do is to strongly tie a malicious actor to a single verifiable account. And by doing so, you would prevent a malicious actor from easily creating a new account, hence preventing this chain of new fraudulent activity from happening. The second problem that we're trying to resolve is how businesses rely on a single common identifier. So in Singapore, the government provides like a unique identifier called the NRIC, and this is akin to the social security number that you see in the United States. The problem with this is that if any business were to be compromised, correct, what you will realize is that there'll be a lot of common information across the different businesses, and it'd be trivial for a malicious actor to make use of such common identifiers to paint a bigger picture of a person easily. So how we try to solve this is by providing citizens with like a unique alias. So how SGID works is, for example, if I were an individual that is registering for a service in two different businesses, let's say A and B. If I were to register with business A, what I would get is a unique alias called, for example, ID ABC. And if I were to register a separate ID with, let's say, another business, business B, instead of getting the same ID, what you get is ID 123. The beauty of this is that if, let's say, the same individual comes on again with business A and interacts with them, instead of seeing a different ID all the time, you have a consistent ID so that you can provide that consistent experience that a lot of businesses are trying to achieve. So you get both the benefits of having a unique ID while maintaining that separation from that common ID, that the problem that we're trying to prevent, which is a common identifier for malicious people to make use of. The last problem that we're trying to fix is to improve the user privacy through zero knowledge data sharing. And what we've realized is that as we get more and more businesses to use identity services, like what Abhishek was mentioning previously, a common problem that we have is that, do we want to have so much sensitive information stored within the government? This doesn't seem like a very sustainable approach. So with that in mind, what we've tried to do is to devise a zero knowledge protocol, and this is mainly transparent to the public, but what this would allow us to do is to continue serving that role of being an identity provider across different businesses, while removing the need for us to store some sensitive information like the user's transaction history, and purely provide that goal of becoming the identity broker. So with these three solutions, we're hoping that we can help improve the way Singaporean citizens transact online, and hopefully improve digital identity in general. Thanks.
Thank you, Li Wei, for sharing Singapore's work on making digital identities more secure. How can countries better manage all of the tech that powers digital identities? For more on this, we're going to hear from Frank Briguglio, Public Sector Identity Governance Strategist at Sailpoint.
Welcome, and thank you for attending today's session. My name is Frank Briguglio. I'm the Global Public Sector Strategist at Sailpoint, and today we're going to discuss the United States federal government's shift to an identity-centric security model. As federal mandates to harness and protect government data more effectively are pressuring the agencies to embrace a new model, an identity-centric practice over perimeter-based security. We're going to talk about what's driving this shift and whether or not the agencies are prepared, what we're seeing, and what they're doing to meet the objectives of cybersecurity risk and compliance. As the global public sector strategist, I've noticed across the globe, agencies have begun the digital transformation and IT modernization of their ecosystem to deliver services, in an agile, secure, and timely manner. But what this really means is it's a broad adoption of cloud infrastructure and services at a pace we've never seen. And there's risk to that. And now we are thrust into adopting changes to how we interact and connect to business applications and data remotely as a result of the global pandemic. All the while, government agencies are increasingly facing new legislation, standards, frameworks, and policies to protect critical and sensitive information. These frameworks, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, ISO, Specifically in Singapore, we have the Cybersecurity Act, the Critical Information Infrastructure Regulations, Personal Data Protection Act. All of these things come into play. But the adversary also continues to become more advanced, and we must protect our organizations from a broad array of threat actors with increasing complexity, resources, and persistence. The increasing number of breaches over the past few years, and the overall impact of these breaches is quite staggering, and has shown us that the identity is the new attack vector. Federal agencies maintain the amount of critical information that can do grave harm to national security, and more importantly, its citizens if accessed by the wrong person. We need to consider our user communities have expanded beyond just humans to identity, machine identities and processes, APIs. The amount of data being created is just growing exponentially. It's no longer feasible for federal IT leadership to think that they can protect this data behind a single network wall, as it's already been identified the fast path to steal data or compromise an agency is through the identity. These challenges are leaving the agencies open to the risk, costs, embarrassment, non-compliance. The list is many of what's happening. So as it's time that there's a shift in our approach to cybersecurity. So in comes the identity-centric approach to modern security. This helps organizations protect the weapons that are being used against us, the identity itself. But what I see is, are agencies ready for this shift to an identity-centric security model? I've found that, in the United States, nearly half of the US government agencies they're on their way to adopting the identity-focused approach. But many are still relying on the perimeter defense and tools and policies that are wrapped around the perimeter. A little different than zero trust. But zero trust comes in and is forcing them to evolve to a model that's made up of perimeters around the identity domain, whether it's the identity, the credential, privileges, roles, most importantly, behavior. Instead of building the many layers of security from the outside in, zero trust says we need to protect from the inside out and build the controls around where you need them. And that's around the identity, the data, and the device. In the US, we've had a lot of drivers. In 2019, the White House released the new ICAM modernization strategy that outlines the objectives for securing federal IT systems. The memo delivers a common vision for using identity and access management controls. Many agencies are still developing their approach. I would say the lion's share are focusing on establishing the baseline of users and objects and access. And some have started to look at this modern security architecture rooted in identity and device, and they're extending that to include other types of credentialing, derived credentials, assured identities. Thanks to the US government's Department of Homeland Security Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, and if you remember the OPM breach in 2015, the cyber sprint that was a result of that, US agencies were forced to gain a better idea of the users, devices, and network. So they have a better picture than they did a couple of years ago just by establishing this baseline. The programs and activities that I mentioned have provided the agencies with the key objectives and tools and support at the government level to create a baseline of what is connecting to the network, who is connecting to the network, what data is on the network, and how it's being used. The CDM program provides continuous monitoring of who has access to what, and what are they doing with that access. So this is building a solid picture of privileged and non-privileged users alike, as well as non-person entities. So a lot of the discovery, correlation, visibility is a result of their steps that they've gone forward with the identity governance platform. And as the agencies, continue to address the large amount of remote workers, IT leaders have had to evolve their thinking on zero trust and their approach and actually when, right? Increasingly, though, they're becoming more comfortable with the concept, and that's critical. and they're seeking to lay that foundation for future deployments. As we approach this, what we're calling new normal, I think is an overused term, but it really, the global pandemic has upended how workplace activities happen. You know, the surge in telework has indeed changed security conversations, but it's been that catalyst that's been needed for folks to think about how strong the network perimeter is, and what they're finding is it really isn't. So new or old, we need to establish this baseline of users, activity, devices, data to move forward with this approach. The zero trust concept actually represents the paradigm shift that's required, as I mentioned, you know, from the perimeter to the identity and device centric. You know, we need to ensure every transaction is verified before access is granted to the device and then the user. In the US federal government, this is still a relatively nascent approach with positive movement forward. We have mature agencies implementing solutions. We have some conducting pilot programs. But the critical thing is the IT leaders have recognized that the cybersecurity models are going to be defined by a zero trust architecture. So they're focusing on that, on moving from that perimeter-based defense. The practitioners are focusing on the controls on sensitive data stores, on critical applications, high-value assets and systems, and the networks themselves. They're directly guarding the assets that matter. So identity-defined zero trust becomes a complex topic. It touches almost every organization within an agency, the security, the IT, operations. Everyone has to work together. This is a team sport. So the forward-thinking organizations are achieving this through the integration of existing identity and security technologies. They're advancing what they're doing with them. They're getting to that maturity model through implementing architectures that share identity context and provide risk-based access to critical resources. This is improving security without compromising compliance or user efficiency. So we're allowed to stay in touch with the directives, standards, and frameworks. This is critical. And, you know, as we begin to close, I'd like you to remember that, you know, the identity is the new perimeter. It's never been more critical to your organization in protecting the nation's secrets and citizens. The other thing I like to leave you with is this is a team sport. It requires many disciplines, stakeholders, and software vendors. No one does this alone. So the last question I have for you is to think and say, is my organization ready for a modern security architecture rooted in identity? So we look at these questions here, and this gives us that, you know, way to kind of guide, are we ready to move forward to that next level? Again, thank you very much for attending today. I appreciate it, and I hope you got a lot out of this session. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frank. We've got everyone back here for a panel discussion now, and we're also joined by Chih-Feng, who is Director of Sales Engineering at Sailpoint.
Hi.
Welcome back, everyone. Liwei, if we could just start the discussion with you. How has COVID-19 strengthened the need for digital identities?
I think, like I mentioned in my introduction, right? Like, COVID-19 itself hasn't changed fundamentally how identity works, but I think it sort of increased the importance for some of these identity services that we have. So, as probably most people would have already realized, both in Singapore and all over the world, like the number of transactions, that are online transactions that are happening today, compared against like the start of the year, has like a balloon like multiple times, and in some cases even orders of magnitude. And given like the sheer increase in volume, like you would also expect like the number of cases of like fraud and scams to happen. So with regards to like online digital identity, I think this has just made it a little bit more important, or put a little bit more pressure onto getting some of these like systems rolled out and getting like and more mainstream across like all the services of businesses that are out there.
Absolutely. And Zamma-san, you talked about a few different models of digital identities. We're also seeing some countries plan self-sovereign digital identities that allow citizens to control access to the data that the government holds on them. What are your thoughts on this approach? How effective can it be?
Yeah, I agree with the idea, especially to found the trust model between the trusted IDs. That is nice to make the useful services. However, I want to, while I'm listening the presentation, zero trust is a big issue for us. I'm talking about not only about the connection between the government to the citizens, but inside the government or inside the company. So we have to do the remote working. However, we are not prepared for that situation. Our security solution is more focused on the perimeter model, not the zero trust. So in the normal days, it's okay. So we went to the building and we went to the office and we work there. However, in this situation, it's difficult to protect each users, each officers. So that is the big issue for us, and I agree to move to the zero trust model. However, we are not prepared yet. So now we are working.
Absolutely. And Sailpoint obviously promotes that zero trust model. Chih-Feng, could you tell us a little bit about Sailpoint's approach on this? And I believe you promote identity governance. How can that help agencies better manage security in this new normal?
Yeah, I think identity governance, in short, or in Sailpoint's context, is really about enabling organizations to ensure that every digital identity, like employee, temporary worker, contingent worker, vendor, supplier, or even robotic identity, having the right access to the right resource for the right reason and at the right time. So it provides organizations answers to three very important security questions: who has access, who should have access, and what are they doing with the access? So I think much has been said about the new normal, right? And which has accelerated the shift towards remote workforce, contingent workers, and all of this means increasing demand, onboarding, offloading users, managing security access and compliance. So when we talk about hundreds and thousands of users and applications, this can be a daunting task, ensuring security, compliance, and efficiency. So basically, identity governance helps organizations rethink security from the identity perspective and putting in place a risk-based approach to govern user access, lifecycle events, and separation of duties policies and approval workflow. Thanks.
Abhishek, you talked about identity being one of the important building blocks of India's public service delivery machine. How has Aadhaar helped India speed up response to COVID-19?
See, the Aadhaar, the biggest use that we could do for using Aadhaar in the COVID-19 response was that when the poor and the underprivileged were faced loss of livelihoods, and we had to offer them some support, financial support from the government for being able to be able to overcome the crisis, we could do direct benefit transfers. What we do is that since all 1.2 billion Aadhaar numbers are linked to bank accounts, and even the poor people who did not have any bank account earlier because they didn't have any identity, and having the Aadhaar, the UID, unique ID, enabled them to use it as a KYC norm for getting a bank account opened. And we had almost 300 million Jan Dhan accounts, which we call the zero balance account, where you don't need to maintain any balance. So immediately after, we were able to within a couple of 2 days or something, we were able to transfer billions of dollars into billions of rupees into these accounts, and people could get access to a basic minimum requirement to meet their ends. Similarly, for farmers, similar subsidies were transferred to this system. So that really helped in ensuring that the response to post-COVID was very fast. Second part was that even the, of course, it was not linked to Aadhaar, but the Arogya Setu, the contact tracing app that we built, that also we used the technical expertise that was built in making these digital platforms like IT platforms in scaling up a contact tracing app which was ready to use in very short time. So in these ways, the identity platforms built in really help in the COVID-19 response.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abhishek. And just going back to Zamma-san, you mentioned that Japan has recently published a new master plan for digital services. Could you paint us a picture of Japan's vision broadly?
Yep. It's difficult to talk in shortly, so just a little bit summarized. We are thinking about the situation of the society in 2030 or 2050. So we will lose the population around this 30 million. It's almost the same to the population of the Canada. So we will be more elderly society, and we will lose the workforces. That is a problem. So we will lose the workforces. At the same time, so the people want to support from the government more. So that is very difficult to take the balance. So the answer from us is to use the digital technology to save the time, to change the way of the thinking or something. So that is the base concept on our grand design. And we are thinking about the seamless government. So Singh said from India said. So we will think about the one government, and moreover we will consolidate the service provider, not only the government, also the private sector. So that is our outline of the grand design.
Fantastic, thank you. And Li Wei, could you tell us a little bit about what Singapore OGP's principles are? What are your core principles behind how you design the digital services? You talked about a number of them in your presentation.
Yeah, so SGID aside, I think the focus on SGID as an experiment that we're working on is solely focused on the idea of improving security and privacy for the users, right? So firstly, by providing the unique ID, so that you by default provide a safer or more secure way for businesses to store personal information of the users. By doing as in how you do this is by default not even giving them personal information to begin with and giving them alternatives. The secondly, the other aspect that we are strongly really considering is with regards to user privacy. So like I discussed as well, when it comes to how we architect some of these things, to be honest, a lot of these things will go transparent to users. It will users will not be able to tell the difference for some of these things. But with regards to user privacy, we're putting in a lot of focus and emphasis to make sure that by default, some of these security features, not being able to leak out some of this sensitive information, is already baked into the protocol, so that there's less to worry about for subsequent people who integrate with our services. I think the last thing that we probably also pay quite a lot of attention to is the inclusivity. So when we design some of these new changes to the protocol, what we take into consideration is that it shouldn't, even though you try to improve some of the aspects, what I say, security and privacy, but we try not to give up any of the, try to give up as little as possible in terms of usability for the citizens that are interfacing with our application. So moving on, as more and more transactions move onto the digital realm, you also want to make sure that as many people as possible can make use of this system. So inclusivity is quite an important factor that we take into consideration when designing some of our services.
Fantastic. And Abhishek, you talked about a few ways in which India is pulling together data from across multiple systems in this new architecture that you have. Could you tell us a little bit more about how India is using this data and information to unlock new opportunities for people?
See, we have come up with the two frameworks. One personal data protection bill that we have a law which is coming up with regard to how do you protect personal data, and in order to ensure that no one who has access to any personal data uses it for any other purpose other than for which citizen has given his consent for. So the underlying principle with regard to use of data is that ensure complete protection of personal data, and wherever it is used, it's used with a consent framework, and the owner of that personal data remains the citizen himself or herself. The second part is the non-personal data that is available at an aggregate level. So for that, we have come up with a framework for sharing of non-personal data at the aggregate level, which can be used for various public policy interventions. Like, for example, the disease surveillance data or epidemic data with regard to how many people are at the aggregate level are suffering from a particular virus or a particular disease. And this kind of data analytics we have used greatly in our COVID-19 response also. Because as you know, our contact tracing app, it not only takes Bluetooth data, but it also takes location data. And the location data is used at the aggregate level. So for using this data, what we are able to do, that we are able to identify areas in which if anybody is detected COVID-19 positive today, then the areas in which he has visited in the last 2 weeks, that areas are mapped. And by using an algorithm, we assign COVID hours for each particular locations. And those areas which are above a particular threshold level of COVID hours, which will mean that more number of people have spent more time in that area, those regions are defined as what we call them pink spots or emerging hotspots. And then this information is shared with the health authorities and the administration in order to ensure that more stringent contingent restrictions are imposed in order to ensure that those areas are contained and the virus spread is prevented. So this is just one example. And similarly, data from various other projects like the agriculture data with regard to using the soil health data, weather data, and playing it with to give agri advices, as I already mentioned, this is being done. So the framework allows sharing of non-personal data at an aggregate level and working out a modality system in which even private entities, corporations who have such data which is non-personal, it can be shared with other entities who might want to deliver a service on top of that data by having a commercial arrangement between them. So this data exchange framework is being planned, which will lead to incubation of data businesses, and that would ensure better services are offered to users by leveraging this data that is available there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abhishek. And Chih-Feng, if I could just come to you now. We've heard from all the speakers about the different ways in which they're promoting privacy and data protection and tackling fraud. What are some of the best practices agencies can adopt for identity-centric security from Sailpoint's perspective?
Yeah, I think we look at it as a three-phased approach when it comes to adopting an identity-centric security. The first step being building a centralized visibility of all the identities and security accesses, building what we call an identity warehouse. And the second step is about validating and cleaning up the security accesses like entitlement creeps, orphan accounts, dormant accounts, or any toxic combination of accesses, access requests, separation of duties, and things like that. And then the final step is about automating and control and compliance process. In this case, about automation of lifecycle events, like the joiner, movers, the leavers, access request. And finally, leveraging AI, machine learning, and to anticipate and adapt to changing security environment.
Thank you, Chih-Feng. We have just a minute left on the clock, and just as a quick conclusion, if we could just go around and if I could just hear from everyone, what's inspiring you at the moment? Where are you learning from? Chih-Feng, if we could just start with you.
Yeah, I think we are living in an interesting time at the moment. I think technology is certainly is developing fast to embrace the change, and we will continue to look at new innovation and how we can use technology to support the changing needs. Yeah.
Abhishek, your thoughts?
Yeah, what I say is that in this pandemic, two things have stood by. That is innovation and collaboration. The more you innovate and more you collaborate and learn from each other, that has been the one big learning which has helped us catch up and build solutions. And that's really, really something that will stay with us post-pandemic also.
Fantastic. Li Wei?
It's kind of a cheesy answer, but like I think with the pandemic, one thing that has been quite inspiring is how like we've seen like the older generation embrace technology. So like we have some of these like new solutions that we've rolled out like to help contact tracing and other efforts, and like it's quite heartening to see how like the older generation or the less tech savvy put in like the extra effort to try to embrace some of these technologies to make sure that everybody, like the welfare of the entire society is improved instead of just like living in their own bubble, which is quite useful and inspiring.
Absolutely. Zamma-san, any final thoughts?
Yeah, our grand design has provided before the pandemic. So we had a discussion about that, but we don't have to change that because we are thinking about the next generation and the next digital age. So I think this is a little bit unique situation from the paperless, and we will go to for the digital, but we have to go to contactless and maybe humorless something. So, however, the main issue to which we have to solve is same, I think. So we have to go on the right way and with collaborating with other countries and other friends.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. That's a wrap for this session. We now have another session going on, new models of government. So head on over to our Facebook or our YouTube pages to catch that one. Thank you for joining us here today and have a good evening ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.